right, so we're recording, and what I'll do is I'll check all the muting. I'll mute Tony, and just you, Susan, is available. All right. So again, everybody, thank you very much for attending. We have a little bit of a shorter list. Looks like Joe's arriving, so we'll have them muted.
There we go.
Blammo, conspiracy theories talking about in the background there. If you have any questions, feel free to click the chat button, and then you'll see the chat window, and you can go ahead and say hello and say hello in the message. I'll go ahead and monitor the chat window, and if you have a question for Susan, feel free to put it into the chat window. After this meeting, since we're recording it, we will be adding it to the YouTube page at the end, and then I'll email that out to everybody, but it will also be posted here on the members website, as was the last video recording from part 1 of Susan's editing talk. So today we're going to have basically a short intro from Joel on the anthology. We'll have Susan then give her talk. Tony will announce the winner of the Shutdown Write-In event, and then Linda will talk a little bit about what's coming up on the agenda. So first person we'll go ahead and give the floor to is Joel. So I'll unmute you, Joel, or you can unmute yourself, I think, if you would like. Cool.
There we go. Okay.
Yep.
All right. We've got a decent amount of stories in of varying lengths, covering all the 7 sins. If anyone has proofreading / editing skills, we could use some help on that. So you can email me or send me a message on Facebook, and we'll see what we can arrange with you. Again, what we're doing with the stories is we're not doing, I guess, what you might call deep editing, ripping people's stories apart and putting them back together. Basically just looking for anything that kind of jumps out that's kind of glaring, and we'll go through, make suggestions, send it back to the author, who can make comments, accept or reject some of those changes. So we're not trying to rewrite your stuff. So if anybody would like to help out with that, that would be great. And that's all I got.
All right. Thank you, Joel. Just a reminder to everyone, please make sure you mute yourselves so we can keep the chatter to a minimum. Susan, we'll go ahead and get the slides here started up, and we can go ahead and begin doing what you need to have done. So.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay?
All right, hold on 1 second. Looks like Anne is having issues. Anne, you might need to adjust. So just real quick, if anybody's having any audio issues, under More, you'll have audio and video settings. Sometimes you may need to click the drop down and find the correct option, or some people may have to turn their audio up, as we found earlier. With some members. Hopefully that can solve your issues. Okay, so sorry, Susan, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
You're up.
Okay, this is editing part 2, pitfalls and pointers. Last week, can you do the next slide? Are you doing the slides, Matthew, again?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
So to review, last week we went over the 2 types of editing: developmental editing, where you look at the entire document, you do revision, and it's the most intense and most difficult. And then copy editing, which is the tidy up, and you look for spelling, punctuation, grammar errors, things like that. Okay, next one. Okay, last week, Andy, you asked me, I had said that a subplot typically mimics the theme of the main story. And you asked me for examples, and my mind blanked out other than having this vague memory that Shakespeare did all the time. So while I was thinking about it, this is what I came up with. My daughter and I were watching Chuck, which is an old television show. I don't know if any of you have seen it. The idea is that this computer nerd guy accidentally gets the CIA, FBI computer dumped into his head, and he remembers and puts together all the stuff that they knew. Now, every show, it's a particularly well-written show. It's very silly, but it's very well-written. And every show has a theme. So in this one episode that I've got a link to part of it, the theme was trust. Like, it starts off with Chuck not trusting Sarah, who's the girl he's in love with, and she doesn't know whether she loves him. So he follows her around. Then he finds out that the guy he thinks she's dating is actually her father, who is a con artist. So then you get into trust again. And then at the end, the father says that he totally trusts Chuck, and so he trusted him with the money. So that was the overarching theme of trust. Now, the subplot was that Chuck's best friend, Morgan, borrowed some money so that he could move in with his girlfriend, but instead of moving in with his girlfriend and doing what he had been trusted to do, he bought a DeLorean and wasted his money. So somebody's on this. Somebody else is on. It's making noises. But anyways, the idea was it was looking at trust. So when you mimic the theme, you're looking at it from all different angles. Like, in a case like this, trust that worked, trust that didn't work, trust that was betrayed, all of these kinds of things. Now, if you want to look at it in literature, you see that in television a lot. TV shows do that very well. In literature, To Kill a Mockingbird, you've got the theme of Atticus fighting evil. It's a forlorn fight because it's unbeatable. He's going to lose, but he's trying to do what is right. A secondary theme was, if you recall, Jem destroyed all the flowers of Mrs. Dubose, who was supposed to be the meanest woman in the world. And as his punishment, he had to read to her every day. And he complained because every day the time seemed to get longer and longer. But what was happening was she was trying to beat her morphine addiction, which again was like an fighting against evil, unbeatable odds, because she was dying, so she would be able to die free. So again, you have the fight, the good fight, even though you know you're going to lose. So you've got your repeated theme. Now, in Sue's book, Rare Blood, there's a couple of themes in there. Like, the main characters are Tristan the vampire and Miranda. And Tristan's got this courtship dance going with Miranda, and she keeps pushing him away because he's a vampire, but he's still respectful. She has secondary characters, Sergio, who is infatuated with Lena, who's Miranda's publisher or editor. And instead of doing it properly, he recklessly lets another vampire convert him so that he can be with Lena. So these ones both have an obsession with caution and that obsession without caution. And so it's still the same theme, but being looked at slightly differently with different characters. So I don't know if that answers your question, Andy, but those were examples that I came up with. And you, as I said, you can see it really well on well-done TV shows, because that's sort of stock and trade, that the secondary characters reflect what the theme is, but from a different aspect. Okay, next slide. Okay, all the places that can go horribly wrong. The reason I said that is because it's, when you're doing developmental editing, you're making your story go right. It's got to run properly. So let's have the next slide. That was the last slide. We need a new slide. Okay, so we mentioned before, developmental editing is looking at the text as a whole, and you're moving around scenes, paragraphs, sentences, whatever, and you're enhancing character growth, and you're keeping the story going in the right direction. That's really important because a lot of people wobble around their story spine. Okay, next one. Okay, so when you're doing developmental editing, you start with any kind of editing. You start large to small. Like you're trying to take the biggest chunks and make them work properly. Different people do it differently. You can do it as you go, which is kind of a recursive thing. That's the way I do it. Like I'll write a chapter or two, then I'll go back and revise, and then I'll go forward and go back and revise. You can do the whole thing when the book is finished, or you can do a combination of them both. I tend to do like chapter by chapter by chapter, and about a quarter or a third of the way through, I go back to the beginning and revise all the way through, and then write the next third with little bits of revision, and then at the end I do kind of intense revision. When you're writing and when you're doing revision, only fix the most obvious word and punctuation errors as you're going, because otherwise you'll get all muddled and you'll get half of them fixed, half of them not fixed. You'll lose your focus on keeping your story straight, and that's really the most important thing when you're doing developmental editing. Okay, next one. Okay, the whole book is your focus of developmental editing. You're looking at plot, you're looking at characterization, structure, pacing, and tone. And people talk a lot about plot and characterization, but the structure, pacing, and tone is what makes your story shine. It's what makes it different from all the others, because there really aren't that many stories. There's just different takes on the same ideas. Okay, the next one. Okay, muddle editing. When you're editing, don't edit while you're creating, because you're actually flipping around in your brain. The right side of your brain is the creative part. That's the part that's got the movie, the vision, the stuff that you're trying to do. And you don't want to start checking spelling and changing around sentences, because that's the left side of your brain. So it's literally like if you had a pencil and you kept moving it from your right hand to your left hand, to your right hand to your left hand. So you want to do each part consistently using your strengths, not just flip around all the time. Typically, people will revise first on the screen, and then excuse me, and then I would recommend revising on paper, because you see different things when you're looking at paper. I tend to find developmental errors on paper and copy editing errors on either. So you can try reviewing using more than one format as well: Kindle, computer, large fonts, etc. There was a question from Sierra a minute ago that I saw that. What was the question again?
She had a question about pacing. What is it exactly? How do you address it? Things of that nature.
Pacing is how quickly you move things along, like whether it's going fast or going slow, whether there's a sense that the rhythm is correct, because it's just like in music. Things happen at a certain rate, and you can speed them up and you can slow them down, but they have to happen a certain way. And I'll talk more about how you fix that in a later slide, but that's pretty much what it is. Okay, the next slide. Okay, basic craft structure to check. The simple sequence of a book or a short story is event, character reaction, action. Then there's event in response to the action, reaction, action, and that just keeps going all the way through the book. Your first paragraph or page should introduce the location, the character, and the problem. And it helps a lot if you start with action, usually, sometimes not always, there's an exception, not with exposition. One of the things you see is people want to explain everything and do the setting, like up the yin-yang. And honestly, that's one of my big flaws. I usually start with a prologue that will be like 5 to 10 pages long. And then when I'm revising, I'll drop it down to about 2 or 3 pages. And then when I'm revising, I'll drop it down to a paragraph or 2. And then when I'm revising, I'll say, why did I do this? And I seed the information back into the book. So that's a real problem with me, is to avoid the exposition. And everybody has their flaws, and it's really good to know what your flaws are. Okay, next one. Okay, more structure pitfalls. You need to do your backstory in little tiny nuggets throughout, not in a lot of exposition, and especially not in the first 3 to 5 pages. Again, my huge problem. I do this all the time and have to take it out. It's like you're always worried that the reader won't get it. And readers are pretty good, and if you're clever with your writing, they will especially get it. And you just start dropping it in hints all the way through. The last paragraph of your book should echo the first paragraph. If you look at really fine books, I've done this with classes, adult and teens, where you take the first paragraph and the last paragraph of a book and you do it for like 10 books and you mix them up. And people can almost always match the last paragraph with the first paragraph in a really well-crafted book. So it's something to look at. It should be, your last paragraph should be echoing what you put in your first paragraph. And if it doesn't, it probably means that either your first paragraph was not precise enough or your last paragraph wasn't what it was supposed to be. It was gone on too long or too short or something. But you can take a look at it. I mean, it's not like your book's going to fall down dead if you don't do it, but it's a way to check. Okay, next paragraph. Okay, this is the big one. This is the tough one. It's kill your darlings. If you have a scene or a character, not necessarily a character, but a scene or an event that you absolutely love to the point where you just want to open the book for that scene, you got to get rid of it because you have to have your story be even. One of the things is, I worked one time with a writer, he won all these awards, he was amazing. And he used to talk about the fictive dream. Anything that takes a person out of the dream you're creating is a problem. And if your scene or your event is so wildly uneven, it's a problem. You need to have the tone the same or appropriate to the story. It shouldn't suddenly be this incredible, passionate love scene when you've been talking about a spy thriller, unless they've already been leading up to it. Or vice versa. You can't have this sudden horrifying event in the middle of a love story. It has to match. Okay, the other thing is the rule of 3. Our society works in 3s. 3 little pigs, big bad wolf does the 3 little pigs. There's the 3 billy goats gruff, the small, medium, large, all those kinds of things. So if you're doing something in your story and you've got it twice, you need to have it 3 times. It can be an echoed event. It could be somebody doing a misstep, like a character piece. Say they steal a cupcake. Well, if they steal a cupcake twice, or they steal a cupcake and later they steal a tuna sandwich, you got to have them steal a bread roll later. That has to happen 3 times. Once or 3, never twice. Okay, the spine of the story should always be evident. People always think the spine of their story is evident. That's where distance helps. You don't want to wobble around it. You want to make sure that every single thing is moving in a direction that you want to go to. If you're a pantser and you just want to write, that's fine, but this is one of the places you kind of have to look at to make sure you've stayed with the action that you've set in motion and not wobbled off to a character description or a restaurant meal or something like that. It doesn't add to the action or to the character growth.
Susan, is just a quick question. Is the spine of your story, are you talking about like side quests and things like that where you doesn't move the story along? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, side quests, or it could be some kind of scene between 2 characters, which, while it makes your heart go pitter-pat, it doesn't actually move the story. There's a lot of ways to mess up your story. I have made almost every mistake that's possible to make, so I speak from experience. And that's where the revision editing is so important. And I think I have it in one of the slides, maybe the next one or someplace. But basically the idea is if you're thinking of a scene If you can take that scene out without affecting the story, that scene needs to go, because that's wobbled you off the spine of the story. And you particularly get things where people really like something. They really want to talk about something. I will do it about nature, because I like nature. I'll start talking about the trees and the air and the colors and all this kind of stuff. And when push comes to shove, it really doesn't do a thing for my story. It might help the tone if I do it briefly, but my infatuation with it is not the reader's infatuation. That's why they say the first draft you write for yourself, the second draft you write for your readers. In your first draft, you write any damn thing you want. It's just fine. It's when you're revising that you take out the stuff that a reader does not want or need. So, okay, next slide. Okay, now here are the two things that I see everywhere. Do you overwrite, which is the sledgehammer technique? It's like, in case I didn't tell you the last 3 times, let me tell you again in case you missed it. I do that a lot. Or do you underwrite, where you think you've put it in the story, but it isn't there, and shouldn't it be obvious? And that's where another pair of eyes can be very helpful, because I don't know if you've had the experience of somebody asking you about something. You say, well, it's this, 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 and this. And they say, yeah, but it's not in the book. So most writers will do one or both in their first drafts. And that's why I do think it's helpful to have another set of eyes. Okay, next one. Okay, another thing, do some editing for other people. It's not just good karma, which it is, but it helps you with your own work, because you start seeing mistakes that other people make, and then you kind of go, oh, I did that too. Maybe I should go back and look at mine. It's really good for you as a writer to help edit other people. Okay. Okay, building characters. A character should grow and change in tandem with the plot. One of the things you see in comic books and superheroes is they don't change. What you get at the beginning of the story is what you get at the end of the story. In a good book, regardless of genre, the main character grows and changes. And it doesn't happen suddenly, it happens with each little incident. In a really good book, in a great book, the secondary characters also grow, and that's hard to pull off. One of the questions you ask yourself is their growth consistent and reasonable? Again, does it little bits, not just a sudden revelation of a sadder but wiser man? And when you get to where you want the character to be, you have to ensure that there are prior hints about the direction that support this growth. So, next one. Okay, good guys and bad guys. You probably know this, but your main characters have a huge backstory, which should not show up in the book mostly. Your bad guys should also have huge backstories, which mostly don't show up in the book. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Okay, so making them real. This is a trick that I use. Everybody has their own. This isn't the be all and end all. But I start to imagine, I ask myself, what do they eat for breakfast? If you don't know what they would eat for breakfast, you need to spend more time imagining their lives. Like, what do they do in the morning? How do they go to bed at night? What do they do when they're confined in their house with coronavirus? You need to know all the things your characters would do, or you won't be able to know what they will do when they're faced with problems. And that's where characters don't feel real. That's when they're just being puppets to the plot, and the readers never connect with them because they never feel real to the readers, because they don't have all those silly little details that goes into everybody's life. So they're, with the idea that everyone's the hero of their own story, you need to know why a character does everything they do, good guys and bad guys. You can't have bad guys doing things just because they're evil, or just because you don't like them, or you need something to bring out something in the main character. They have to have their own path, their own trajectory, their own reasons. Basically, it's flaws and virtues for everybody. So next slide. Okay, pacing and tone. This is what you were asking about, Sierra. Pacing is created by the overall structure in scenes, chapters in the book. Tone is created by the attention to sentence structure and language, and both vary throughout the book to support the theme. Everything in your books should support plot, character, and theme. I have a clip here from Jurassic Park, but I don't think when you have time, I'm not going to go through it because it's about 15 minutes, 10 minutes long, and we don't really have time. If you have time later, I would recommend it because it talks about theme and it talks about how characters build on each other and how the characters explore a theme, and that's what makes the characters seem real, and it makes the tension strong. Okay, fixing things, because it doesn't do any good to tell you these are mistakes unless you know how to fix them. Okay, next slide. Whole book fixes. Ensure that you've introduced chapter 1 and each chapter afterwards with a substantial hook, often action that moves the story forward. And I know this is obvious, but I also know how easy it is when you're involved in a story to not do that, because you're just kind of going along with it. And what's of interest to you may not be an action hook to keep people going. One of the things I've read about is one of the biggest mistakes you can do is at the end of a chapter, you have your character go to sleep, because then your reader does, oh, it's time to go to sleep, and close the book. So you end on action and you start with action, so people keep going. One of the things that I do, and I deeply, deeply recommend it, is you chart your book. I tend to do this about half to 2/3 of the way through. I meant to put a chart, like a photograph of the chart in here, and I didn't. But basically what you do is you do a column for the chapter, a column for how many pages that chapter is, what the action is, who the characters are, what the character changes are, and what the emotional and thematic changes are. So that way you can see if you have an uneven story development, like you've got action, 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 and then all of a sudden there's no action. Yeah. Is that Sierra? You do that too? Right. And I find other people are probably smarter than me. I screw up time all the time. The book I'm working on with my writing partner right now, we have the kids go away for the weekend and the action happens on the weekend. Well, when I actually counted how many times they went to bed and got up, we had a 5-day weekend going from Friday to Sunday. So that meant a little bit of rewriting. But honestly, if I hadn't charted it, I wouldn't have seen it. I have one time I had my characters have breakfast 3 times, or maybe it was lunch. I don't remember. I like food. I have my people eat a lot. So you want to look for all that stuff that is so easy to forget. I mean, a book is a long piece of material. You got a lot of stuff happening. It's very easy to drop things. So you can diagram the book the way I showed in the last presentation about first, second, and third act. Like, do things actually fall where they're supposed to fall? If they don't, then you need to look at why they don't. It helped, or good? Do the numbers? I can't read it. I've got my little symbols in front of that. Okay, do the numbers play out evenly? Like, do you have things happen in a way that you want them to happen, or do you have big gaps or little gaps? Okay, the next page. Okay, chapters and paragraphs. Each chapter should also have a beginning, middle, and end. So just as your whole book has a beginning, middle, and end, your chapters have beginnings, middles, and ends with hooks. And every scene, as I've said again and again, has got to move the plot and the character forward. If you're unsure, think about whether the story would hold together if you delete the chapter or the scene or the paragraph. And if it really wouldn't make any difference to the story, take it out. Because you want your story to be tight. You want it to be crisp. You want people to keep going. You can also think about, would it be better in a different order? I saw something the other day, and I'd never seen it before, and they were like, oh, and everybody knows this. And I'm like, well, I've never heard that before. What they were saying is that if the character has a plan, if the plan is going to fail, you tell them about it ahead of time so that you know that the plan's going to fail. If the plan's going to succeed, you walk along with the main characters so that you're experiencing the successes they do. And I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that holds up, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And that's where you get into things in a different order as well. The other thing is to ensure there are transitions from chapter to chapter and from paragraph to paragraph. That sounds like high school English. I don't mean, however, but and. I mean, does your action flow? Like, does one thing happen after another? It's like that old thing about, make a peanut butter sandwich and you discover you never took the bread out of the bag. Just make sure everything happens and it is led from one thing to the next. Okay, next thing. Chapter length. You can have a similar length to help with pacing for plot and action. In fiction, it used to be, 15, 20 years ago, it was absolutely mandatory. Your chapters pretty much had to be the same length. Now it's the writer's decision, which I think is good. But it needs to be a decision, not I guess this chapter's 20 pages and the next chapter's 4. Because that makes it the reader uncomfortable because it feels all on end. So there's good comments coming as we're going. I'm not responding to all the comments, but I appreciate them because people are coming up with good stuff. Okay, next one. Okay, dialogue and description. Break up dense dialogue dense description with dialogue, and break up lengthy dialogue with description. This is where I often use the rule of 3. Like after they've said 3 things, I'll throw in a line of description. Even if it's just movement, like the character walked across the room and opened the shutters. Just to break it up because it gets exhausting for people to have the same thing over and over again. And one of the things you can do to see if you're looking at a printed page, you blur your eyes. And is there a pleasing pattern of white space that actually matters? Okay, somebody asked about kids' books, the length of the pages, the chapters. It used to be, but not anymore, that there was hard and fast rules. I would personally recommend that if you are writing a book for 8 and younger, that you don't have the chapters more than 4 to 6 pages. If you're writing for like 12-year-olds, probably 10 to 12 pages. If you're writing for teens, I would do the same because they've been raised in the generation with short attention spans. When in doubt, given the modern way we look at things, I would go for shorter rather than longer. But that's my personal opinion. That's not a rule. Okay, next thing. Okay, point of view. This thing, oh my gosh, this is the worst, and this is what you see all the time. Point of view switches. Most stories in our culture are told in third person limited. That means it's like he saw, she saw, and you only see what that person sees. An omniscient narrator, which is seeing everything, can reveal lots of information but creates distance. An omniscient narrator is a point of view. It is not a fallback. You don't do Geraldine walked to the store thinking all the while of her lost love, Raphael. Mrs. McGillicuddy looked down the street and saw them doing such and such. That is omniscient point of view. Otherwise, what you got is head hopping. And if you're just moving around in people's point of view without consistency or indication, it'll really stress out your readers. It does seem difficult, but when you've chosen whatever point of view you're using, don't randomly wander around in heads. You have to have an indicator of whose point of view you're looking at. It can be a scene break. It can even be their name, but I don't recommend it because it's better to stick with one point of view or to be very clear about whose point of view you're reading. For example, if you're reading a romance, a lot of romances alternate between the woman's point of view and the man's point of view, but they don't usually muck them together. There's usually a scene break or a chapter break or whatever. You can also do that with, I think in fantasy they do that too, but less often. They usually stay with one point of view and occasionally go to a secondary character's point of view. But it has to be a clear distinction, not a, I mean, I've seen them where the point of view flips around all in the same paragraph, and it's really frustrating because you don't know who's talking or why they're talking or what they're thinking. So that's kind of a big thing for me. And it's not because I do it perfectly. I'm always going back and going, oh yeah, I mucked that up. I'm in somebody else's point of view. So it's just something to be really careful of when you're doing revision. Okay, next one. Matthew, did we lose you? He left.
No. General fixes for plot, POV, character growth.
Yeah, that one. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Did you change it and I didn't even notice?
I'm tricksy like that.
Oh, okay. Okay, we're at a half hour, so I'm going to go do a little bit more, and then I will stop and send you the rest so that you don't, because I assume you don't want to listen to me talk for 2 hours. Okay, general fixes for plot, point of view, and character growth. As I said, chart. One of the things you can do is chart the action and chart the characters in each chapter. If anything's out of balance with pacing, it shows when you compare it to previous chapters. Read aloud with different voices for different characters to see if you're head hopping. If all of a sudden you've got like 6 voices going, you're head hopping like crazy. Trace the plot growth in the chapter. Does every scene move the plot forward and reveal critical aspects of the character? And look for story, plot, subplots, echoes, because you want to use those. You want, if your secondary characters are doing something, you want to use what they're doing to enhance what the main character is doing. Okay, next one. Okay, sentence pitfalls. Okay, vary your sentence structure. Avoid starting repeatedly with ing phrasing, like grasping my cup of coffee, I ran down the steps. I did that without realizing it in a manuscript, and I had a professional writer read it for me, and she wrote on this margin, if you use that structure one more time, I'm going to vomit all over your book. So that was kind of a clear idea that I'd done it too much. Watch out for endless, simple declarative sentences. And that is a real problem I see in indie writing, where Gertrude went down the steps. She picked up her coffee cup. She threw it at the dog. And I mean, I'm automatically changing it up because I've done it forever. Okay, too many compound sentences, that's something linked with an and or a but. You use your structure to support pacing. Short sentences are used for action and intense emotion. Longer sentences are used for reflection and mood descriptions. Okay, next one. Okay, sentence fixes. Look at or write down the structure of each sentence in a key scene. If you think you have a problem with repeating the way you do it, just start writing it down. Read it aloud. This is huge. If you read aloud, if your rhythm is repetitive, you'll hear it. If your voice stutters around, that means there's something wrong with your pacing. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with the grammar. It means the way your sentences are actually put together. There is something wrong with it. You might need to use some synonyms to get the right cadence. It's almost like music. It's got to have the right cadence. And be aware of your favorite sentence structures. Everybody has their favorites, and they do them over and over again. Again, that's where revision fixes them, when you realize you've just done the same thing again and again and again. Okay, next one. Okay, we'll do any questions about this and then probably stop, because all the other stuff is about copy editing and you can probably figure that out for yourself. So does anybody have any questions?
Feel free to unmute if somebody has a specific question. Maybe Christine, if you're typing, if you wanted to go ahead and just ask it directly.
Okay. I can't remember the page, but you were talking about charting and something else. You gave 3 different things. I'm wondering if you have to do all of them or pick one of them.
What I would do is pick one and try to figure out for yourself where you mostly mess up, and then do whatever kind of charting or diagramming is most likely going to show that, because that's the whole point. I mean, this chart goes to nobody but you. It's just to provide information to yourself about pacing or about your characters. Like if you have a tendency to have characters that don't seem to go anywhere or don't grow, then chart your characters. If you have trouble with your plot wobbling all over the place, chart the plot. You can chart the whole thing if you want to. I usually do just because I know how many mistakes I make, and I want to find them myself, not have a reader find them.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but whatever. You're welcome. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions for Susan? Susan, what's the biggest issue? I know you review a lot of people's books, you read a lot of indie stuff, you read a lot of books. What is maybe the most common problem that you're seeing that maybe you can give as a walk away for the people on the call to look for?
Problems the most often.
I'm sorry, what was it again?
3 problems are most frequent. Too much backstory up front. And that's lack of confidence as a writer, because you're afraid if you don't tell them everything, they won't get it. And like I said, I do that all the time. The second one is head hopping, switches of point of view, going all over the place. And the third one is repetitive sentence structure. Those are things I see frequently. And you look at it, you think, oh, you need a good editor. And unfortunately, as indie writers, we don't usually have editors. And so we have to do it all ourselves. And that's doubly hard, and you have to be incredibly aware of the mistakes that you tend to make. I mean, we help each other, obviously, but it's so easy to make mistakes. There's so many things in a book. So it's like taking care and taking time is just super important, I think. Different people have different opinions, but that's what I think.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and stop the lecture. All right. I'll assume that there are no more questions. Susan, thank you very much again for taking your time to put this together and provide the information here. Just want to let everybody know that Susan's slides, and everybody's giving lots of golf claps here. Good job, Susan. Both of Susan's talks are available on the members website, and you can see those here, here at the co-op/members. And then I will be linking this video at the end of, when this is all done, I'll be linking the video here as well so you can watch it again. So if Susan, you don't have anything else to say, thank you very much.
No, just one thing. With
Go
the
ahead.
slides, you're doing the video, but there's like about another 10 or 15 slides.
Yeah.
They'll be there too?
They're there. The entire slide deck is there. Part 1 and part 2 are already available on the member site. Yes.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but we're going to continue the meeting. We have a couple additional items that we wanted to announce, and then we'll go ahead and close up the meeting. So I'll go ahead and stop recording.